a number of years ago when I got a telephone call from the philosophy editor at Routledge, who asked me to do a companion volume. They have a well-respected series, companion to metaphysics, companion to epistemology, companion to this, that, and the other in philosophy. And he wanted a companion to philosophy of technology. And I wanted to get out of it. So I said, okay, on two conditions. Most companion volumes do a lot of review of the past. You know, this is how this little part of this field developed, and articles like that. I said, I don't want to do that. Philosophy of technology is a young field. Reviewing its history will take 2 pages. What I want to do is to get the new, exciting work that's being done out in the public. Work by young, probably unrecognized scholars at this point, maybe even some graduate students. I want the cutting-edge material that people are bringing to conferences and getting conversations started over, but generally having a hard time getting published. So he thought about that for a second. He said, okay, what's the second item? Well, the second thing is I want a co-editor. I'd like Ashley Shew to be my co-editor. He said, okay. All right. So we started. Ashley and I sat down, talked about this for a while. She had served as my managing editor when I was editor of Techne, Research in Philosophy and Technology. And so she is very well acquainted with who's writing and who's doing what. She's also on the board of directors of the Society for Philosophy and Technology, and just very active in the field, and especially with the younger scholars. So we put together a list and proceeded to invite people to contribute with an amazing, about a 90% acceptance rate. And of the 32 chapters, only 7 are graybeards. So I think we were successful in getting the new voices out. We had a bit of an interruption for a couple of years, but got back on track. Our contributors were incredibly patient and understanding and eager to see this volume go through. Ashley and I each have a chapter. We wrote the introduction, a very short one, and I'll just at this point stop and turn it over to Ashley.
Yeah, so this was commissioned in 2013, and it was published in 2017, right? This took a very long time to get out. Sometimes for medical reasons on one or another of our parts, our authors were very patient with us and handled a number of things beautifully. You'll notice that our title is not a Routledge companion, despite the fact that we were commissioned to do a Routledge companion edited volume. Along the way, things got so fresh and so little older ground was tread that when we had all the papers compiled with abstracts and titled, and when we rearranged the table of contents several times along the way, because we really wanted to feature early career scholars, and these early career scholars were not necessarily sortable in the same way that previous volumes of philosophy of technology have been done. So there's been 3 or 4 volumes, edited volumes on philosophy of technology. Sometimes they include older works. We didn't want any old works. There's nothing that's repeated elsewhere in this volume, so it's all new, fresh work by predominantly early career scholars. Or when we invited later career scholars, does anyone actually say that? That doesn't even sound nice.
Graybeards.
Well, some of them don't have beards.
Yes.
So we were thinking about what's the future of this field, and when we invited later career scholars, which I don't know if I'm coining that or if everyone's going to be offended no matter what we say, that they were writing on topics that they hadn't spent their career in, that they weren't marinated in, that they were writing on something new and different from the research program that they had had throughout their career. Sometimes we asked them to go back to work that they had done. So we have a table of contents here. So in one of the sections we asked, I'm thinking here, Don Eide, writing on techno art. He doesn't have that much written on art, but we asked him to write on art. We asked Carl Mitchum, who's another later career scholar in our field. In his past, he had written on religion and technology. He hasn't written on that. He's been writing about philosophy of engineering for some time. We asked him to revisit religion and technology as a topic that he hadn't touched in 25 years. So we were really looking at how do we think about philosophy of technology now and focused on newer scholarship as it's being done now. And we laid it out several times, and this is the sort of layout that we got into. So we have these different sections arranged around space, which is how we ended up with the title Spaces for the Future. And this is not just Spaces for the Future, but what we see philosophy of technology scholarship doing in the future, because we've actually asked a lot of the people who will be philosophy of technology scholars in the future, those early career scholars, the graduate students that we asked to write in this volume. So we've tracked it this way. We have ethical space and experience, political space and agency, virtual space and property, personal space and design, inner space meaning as opposed to outer space, so not inside of our bodies, but inside planetary space, perhaps, and then outer space and imagination. And it's really, we had a lot of very enthusiastic scholars who even stuck with us after we told them it's not going to be a Routledge companion anymore because of how our series editor had pushed back on us. He said, you know, it's not quite this anymore. Can we have a different title with all the same terms that we had before, but it's not doing the traditional thing that it doesn't look like other companion volumes for the reasons that you guys have laid out. So we ended up, the very first article we have is about data technology and gender, thinking about trans lives and how we set data in particular ways that ends up being terribly discriminatory in fact. We have people writing about discrimination, people writing about video games and ethics, how they affect the ethical space that we have when we set out in virtual worlds. Of course, social networking is a topic that is just starting to be explored in philosophy of technology in different ways. And then issues of art and technology get taken up. One by a later career scholar, and then another piece on art by someone who's still a graduate student. When we get to political space and agency, we have chapters on robots with guns, which I asked the author, I want you to write something on robots with guns. What would you like this called? She's like, I want to call them robots with guns, because that was actually, let's just say what it's about, Ashley. These sorts of things came out along the way, talking about sort of religion and agency and citizenship in the future, what these things are going to look like and how we can make sense of it. My own work was grouped in this way to think about how we regard animals in our spaces and whether we consider them agents. We have virtual space and property, so lots of issues around privacy versus obscurity come here. So what do we want to be on the internet? Becomes a question. What sort of data do we want managed? How do we want it managed? How do we make a sense of property rights and intellectual property claims, especially in a digital world where we haven't seen as much work on these sorts of things out of philosophy. Big data gets covered in this as well. In personal space and design, thinking about engineering design, design more generally, thinking about translating different technologies between different spaces, thinking about birth, issues of motherhood and mediated birth in a technological age. Once we have all these technologies, how does it change very fundamental personal experiences, personal space that looks like motherhood? And then we have this wonderful thing, you guys know Moore's Law, where data we store more and more and things keep getting smaller and smaller. Cyrus Modi has this wonderful piece that suggests that we don't want to call it Moore's Law, that it's Moore's Regula, because it's not a law governing anything, and he has a new way for us to reframe and think about that in a way that can be helpful for, perhaps for data scientists, but for others who think of this as law-like in character. We have inner space and environment, thinking about renewable technologies, geoengineering, fracking, climate change, and a lot of these people, so one of them's a graduate student, two are early career scholars, and one is maybe associate level. He just wrote a book on fracking. his article is called Fracking. Surprise everybody. It's not misleading or fun, it's, but I guess it's not really fun either, it's fracking. Oh, okay. So there's all these issues, particularly of how we're going to think about the world that we're creating, especially as we think about technologies that have to do with power. I don't mean in a Foucault sense, but I mean like actually energizing objects we use. And finally, we get to outer space and imagination. And this is where Joe located the chapter that he has, thinking about our transcendence in space. But what's really notable about this particular part is 2 of our authors work at NASA. So this isn't just a volume that's aimed at other philosophy of tech scholars. It's supposed to be useful information for all sorts of scholars in these different areas. So when we have the section on renewable energy and talking about climate change and fracking, these things are meant to be practical in some way and not just mere philosophical topics as it's sometimes cast. But there are actual people working in the field that want to have these sort of philosophical conversations about the work they do, and I think it's really fun that we have 2 people from NASA who were very excited to sign on to this volume and work with as authors. And so we get to the picture of our volume now, which surprisingly has space. A fun thing about this cover art, this is not what so they were like, do you have any ideas for what sort of cover art you want to have? And here's my idea that they didn't use, y'all, because it's fantastic. First, it has a star field in the back. You pick out Plato and Aristotle out of your School of Athens picture from the Renaissance. You put lasers shooting out of their eyes and a whole bunch of internet cats around them, and they didn't go with that, y'all. Instead, they went with just the star field in the background to play it off really simply. But the whole book isn't about space. It is about space, but it's not about outer space, right? It's about the sort of spaces we're going to carve out and the futures that we're going to go to, which may or may not look like star fields or not, but definitely have laser cats in them somewhere.
Thanks a lot.